Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I work at the University of Glasgow, as Angela already said, but I joined the Glasgow team from Hamilton in New Zealand, where I worked as a vet and consultant, mainly with dairy farmers, but obviously there are a lot of sheep in New Zealand as well. My particular research area of interest is colostrum management in all ruminant species. And I'm hoping that you will learn something new today. And please, if you have any questions, do pop them in the chat. So this first picture with the helpful arrow showing that this is where we want our lambs to go out of their mothers is to demonstrate that the placental structure of the ewe is different to other species in that it stops large antibody molecules moving across the placenta to the unborn fetus. And this means that the newborn lamb is essentially a blank slate and needs to ingest colostrum from its mother in order to absorb colostral antibodies across its gut into its bloodstream. So when that fails to happen, you'll see on this first slide, I have this acronym FTPI. That stands for failure to transfer passive immunity. And that's what happens when the lamb does not ingest enough quality colostrum in a timely fashion. And the reason that we are concerned with this is that lambs with low blood antibody concentrations or failure to transfer passive immunity are more likely to get sick, more likely to die, and they don't grow as well as their healthy counterparts. So what happens to that lamb in the first hours of life is really crucial in terms of its health and productivity. And it's a big picture issue for your flock because we're in the business of productive animals and sustainable flocks. And if you can't get your lamb management right, you end up losing a lot of high genetic merit stock very early in the piece. And it's really crazy to think that first sort of period, those first hours of life are so critical to the long-term productivity of these animals. So when we talk about colostrum management, we are interested in 5 Qs. Now, I've done presentations on colostrum in various countries, and I can tell you with confidence that this does not translate to other languages, but in English, Qs are what we're interested in. And you'll see on this slide, if you take nothing else from this presentation, these are what you're most interested in doing in terms of maximizing colostrum management for your surplus lambs. So in the top box, you'll see that we're interested in the quality of colostrum. And IgG is the main antibody that's in colostrum. And we want our colostrum to be at least, this is a minimum standard, 50 grams per liter IgG. More if we can. And you'll see in this quality slide that the forgotten quality measure is hygiene. And I'll show you some of our latest research work where we measured total bacteria counts, that's what TBC stands for, and total coliform counts, which are those ubiquitous bugs that are found in feces all over your farm. And the reason we're so concerned with hygiene of colostrum is that these coliforms in particular have been shown, particularly in other ruminant species, to block the uptake of antibody molecules across the gut. So even if your colostrum quality is really beautiful in terms of antibody concentration, if it's really dirty, you still will suffer with lambs with low blood antibody concentration because the bacteria will block the uptake of antibodies across the lamb's gut. You really want to administer colostrum quietly because cortisol is like kryptonite to absorption of IgG or antibody molecules. So really work hard at administering colostrum, ideally by teat feed, but if you need to tube, then that's what has to happen. And you want to be gentle and calm when you're administering colostrum. You want to give at least 50 mils per kg of body weight. So depending on the size of your lamb, you want to work out how much you need to give. And we used to talk in the old literature about an absolute volume of colostrum that we need to give. But actually, we're more interested now in an absolute mass of antibody that we give to these lambs. And so what that looks like in an ideal world, and sometimes ideal is not achievable, you want to, for a 4 kilo lamb, administer 200 mils of colostrum in the first probably 6 hours of life, ideally sooner, another 200 mils within the next 6 hours, and a further 200 mils in the next 6 hours, so that that lamb is getting at least 30 grams of antibody in the first 18 hours of life. And this timely fashion is so important because the gut of the lamb closes with time. So it becomes impermeable to antibody molecules, which means that if you feed a lamb colostrum the first time at 24 hours of age, you'll get no absorption of antibody into the bloodstream. So we're on a sort of ticking time bomb situation where the faster the better. And ideally, as I've said, we would split the feed into three 200 ml feeds to allow us to deliver a total of 30 grams of IgG. And then we can quantify how good our lamb blood antibody concentration is by using a Brix refractometer. And we want the Brix refractometer, what that does is it measures the total solids in the blood, and that estimates the antibody concentration in the blood. And it's a really amazing device that you can buy off Amazon for about 20 quid. And it's a dual purpose device. So you can use it for lamb blood and you can use it for colostrum. And what it does is it sort of bends the light around the solids in the colostrum or in the blood. And you want the Brix percentage in the colostrum to be 22% and 9% on lamb serum. Now, it's important here also to realize that we really want to, in the cold north where I live in Scotland, we really want to maximize our lamb performance and growth. So I've put a little star over this quantity box because you will need to feed more when it's really cold outside. And I've put a guide there of about an extra 50 mils per kg body weight if you really are struggling in really cold conditions, which we often are in Scotland. So this is just a quick slide to show you that colostrum is really rich in antibody, but it's also full of all these amazing other components. So in the pink box, there's things known as oligosaccharides. You don't need to know all of these. You just need to know that colostrum is really a perfect cocktail of goodies for newborn lambs. And those pink oligosaccharides, as an example, promote the good bugs or the good bacteria in the lamb's gut. And so there's also other things in there like immune modulators, messengers, vitamins and minerals. It really is, there's a lot of stuff in there beyond antibodies. And then we always get this question, how do you maximize colostrum antibody in ewes? And from our research in Scotland, we found that there was an association with body condition score. So you really want your animals to be not too fat and not too thin. So, and what I mean by not too thin, because that's generally the end of the spectrum we work on, is no less than 2.5 body condition score, and ideally 2.75 at those key pre-breed scan late gestation. Obviously, ewes do lose weight, and so that change in body condition score is really important to minimize as well. So body condition score does influence both quality and often quantity of colostrum produced as well. So important to remember that. Dairy sheep produce lower quality colostrum than beef sheep do. Sometimes in our study, depending on the number of lambs that she's carrying. So we found that ewes that carried twins had higher antibody concentrations than singletons. And actually, the IgG concentration wasn't really affected by nutrition, but of course, nutrition feeds body condition score, so there's a bit of a relationship there. The Spanish have done some work on melatonin supplementation, delivering that 30 days pre-lambing, and have found an effect on colostrum quality. And then sometimes ewes won't produce enough colostrum for newborn lambs. So there are several factors that sort of drive that. So often young animals in their first lactation will not produce enough colostrum, particularly if they're underconditioned. Um, Often ewes that have a longer gestation length, produce a higher volume of colostrum. And then nutrition does play a role here in terms of there's some work to show that if you add a concentrate at about 500 to 750 grams per head in the lead up to lambing, like 1 to 2 weeks pre-lambing, you will see a production effect on colostrum. But of course, you want to optimize body condition score. And sometimes in underfed ewes, we look at starch and protein supplements to maximize colostrum volume. So I've already mentioned the Brix refractometer. You can buy an optical one of these, which is that little black device off Amazon for 20 quid, and you can measure your colostrum quality of your ewes. Remember, you want it to be 22%, which is that minimum at least of 50 grams per liter of antibody. That little device next to it is a digital one, which I have in my lab. They are a bit more expensive. They cost about 300 quid. So if you're feeling flush, you could buy yourself one of those for the farm as well. And I've already said that if you had someone to take some bloods from your lambs, you could also use the Brix refractometer to measure the blood concentration of antibody. So just quickly to finish my presentation, I want to talk to you about some of the work that we recently completed at Glasgow. So we're looking at, I guess, real life farms in a lot of our studies. So in this first piece of work I wanted to highlight, we looked at 4 lowland sheep farms, and we collected colostrum samples and lamb blood samples. And we linked the colostrum IgG concentration with the lamb IgG blood IgG concentration, which was the first time that had been done in the science. So that was really exciting. So what that means is, like, the better the ewe IgG concentration, the better the lamb blood IgG concentration, which is not rocket science, but sometimes it's nice to show it in the literature. We did find that ewes carrying twins had higher colostrum antibody concentration, but there was no association in this work with body condition score because all the ewes in this study were quite well conditioned and there were no really light ones. And I've just put the Brix percentages in there as a guide. And then the last piece of work that we did, that we published last year, was a case study on a single Scottish lowland sheep farm where the lambs were dying. The lamb mortality was really high. And so we measured colostrum. We found that a large percentage of them were below the Brix threshold, showing high quality. And we did see a body condition score association with poor colostrum quality in this work. And a high proportion of feeder samples for surplus lambs in this work were contaminated with bacteria. So this is just a table from the study where you can see that the feeder colostrum, so that's either the teat bottles or the tubes, were really, really dirty. And again, this is a highlight of this presentation. Please be really vigilant at cleaning your feeding equipment for orphan and surplus lambs, because if you maximize your colostrum quality in terms of antibody by getting your ewe condition beautiful and feeding them right, and then your feeder is filthy dirty, your lambs will still have low blood antibody concentration. And you can see here that 80% of the samples that we tested in our lab were filthy, filthy dirty on this farm. So this is an example of a beautiful lambing kitchen with all different sizes of brushes in order to get into those nooks and crannies of your feeding equipment. I would recommend hot water and a detergent, something as simple as fairy liquid, magical fairy liquid. So not expensive, just some elbow grease. And this is really low-hanging fruit to try to maximize calf health. And of course, if you feed calves with dirty milk or dirty colostrum, you could actually infect them with pathogenic bacteria species as well. So you could actually give them something inadvertently rather than just coliforms, which will block antibody absorption. So these are the research papers in case anyone's feeling geeky and wants to look them up. So put those up on the slides. And yeah, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat.
I am Dr. Jessica Cooke, and I'm the Research and Development Manager at Lamlac Milk Replacers. So I'm responsible for running lamb and calf trials and turning the scientific data into best practice advice. So today I'm going to be talking about milk feeding through until weaning. So just to start with, a bit of background to Lamlac Milk Replacer. Lamlac is based on high quality dairy protein, so it's rich in amino acids, which are the building blocks for growth. Lamlac has high energy levels achieved by incorporating a blend of high quality vegetable oils, and it provides the right balance of fatty acids for that lamb. The fat used also has a small fat globule size, which is important for improving digestibility for these young lambs. Lamlac has a fixed formulation, so it's consistently providing all the nutrients required by the lamb. So this is things like your vitamins and minerals, which are important for your normal metabolic functions, as well as supporting immune function and growth. Lamlac is suitable for all rearing systems, and I'm going to show you some trials where we've used it in ad lib systems. It's based on whey protein sourced from British milk. And importantly, Lamlac is tried and tested. And it's now that I'm going to present some of our trial data for lambs reared on Lamlac, demonstrating the fast, healthy growth that can be expected from using a high quality milk replacer. So in this first trial, we compared the performance of lambs being reared on the ewe versus those being reared on milk replacer. So for this trial, we had twin bearing ewes, and all the lambs were left with the ewe for the first 24 hours to suckle their colostrum. At 24 hours, one lamb was left with the ewe and one was actually removed and fed on milk replacer. So it was introduced to a U2 feeder and fed Lamlac, being fed at 39 degrees C for the first week. And then the temperature of that milk was reduced to 12 degrees C. This knockback in temperature is really important to try and encourage creep intake and avoid overconsumption in these young lambs, because a young lamb being offered lovely warm milk will continue to guzzle that warm milk and eat very little creep feed. We obviously need them to be eating enough creep feed to get that rumen to develop, so that at weaning, when we remove the milk, they're eating enough creep, so they've got a well-developed rumen, so they can continue to grow and thrive with no setbacks at weaning. So by reducing that temperature of the milk being offered, that's been shown to actually encourage creep intake. All these lambs were weaned abruptly at 45 days of age, and then they were grouped together. So in the table here, we've got the body weight of the two groups of lambs. So you can see that all the lambs were on average around 4 kilos at birth, and at weaning, the lambs were coming in at just under 19 kilos. And this equated to a daily live weight gain across both treatments of around 330 grams per day. So we can see that there's very similar performance for the lambs reared on the ewe versus lambs being reared artificially on Lamlac milk replacer. We also have the fattening weights at 23 weeks of age, and so we can see that lambs weighed 37, 38 kilos at fattening. So this just shows that lambs can be successfully reared on Lamlac and can achieve very similar performance to those reared on the ewe. So moving on to the next set of trials that we did in 2020, we had two sites. We used Harper Adams University and then a larger commercial unit. For this trial, we were using lambs from triplet bearing ewes. So the strongest, largest lamb was being removed from the ewe, leaving, where possible, two equal lambs on that ewe. So looking at site 1 first, the lambs were fed fresh colostrum at 1, 10 and 18 hours after birth via a bottle and teat. Then they were being introduced to a U2 feeder at 24 hours of age. Initially, the milk was being fed at 25 degrees C until all the lambs were fully trained to feed off the feeder. And then the temperature of the milk was reduced to 20 degrees C for 1 week. Then it was further reduced to 15 degrees C through until weaning. On our second site, the lambs were left on the ewe for the first 24 hours to suckle their colostrum. Then they were introduced to an eco feeder. Initially, the milk was offered at 37 degrees C until they were all trained. Then it was reduced down to 20 degrees C through until weaning. Just looking in this photo here in terms of other management on site 1, you can see that the lambs all had access to forage, creep and water, and then had a heat lamp initially. So moving on to the results of this trial. In this table, we've got site 1 and site 2 and the body weights of these lambs. So you can see that the birth weight of the lambs was on average around 4 kilos, ranging from 3 to 6 kilos. At week 2, across both sites, the lambs were weighing just under 9 kilos. And then at weaning, on day 35, the lambs on site 1 weighed just under 18 kilos, which equated to a day live weight gain from birth to weaning of 0.38 kilos per day. On site 2, the lambs were achieving 15 kilos at weaning on day 35, which was a day live weight gain of 0.31 kilos per day. Looking at the intakes on site 1, the lambs were drinking on average 2 litres per day at week 3. This increased to around 2.5 litres of milk per day as weaning approached. So in total, the lambs on site 1 were consuming around 12 kilos of milk powder per lamb. Moving on to our next trial in 2021, again, we had trials across 2 sites. Site 1 was Harper Adams University and site 2 was Rees Heath College. Again, we were using triplet bearing ewes and removing the strongest, largest lamb. At site 1, the lambs were being left on the ewe for the first 24 hours and only fed additional colostrum if it was felt needed. The lambs were introduced to a U2 feeder at 24 hours. Milk was offered at 25 degrees C until they were all fully trained. Then it was reduced by 2 degrees every 2 days until we got it down to 15 degrees C, where it was held until weaning. On site 2, the lambs were being left on the ewe for the first 6 to 10 hours, and then they got a second feeder colostrum via a bottle and teat. They were then introduced to an eco feeder at 24 hours of age. The milk was being fed at 25 degrees C until they were all fully trained. Then it was reduced to 20 degrees C for 1 week and then further knocked back to 15 degrees C until weaning. All lambs across both sites were being weaned abruptly at 35 days of age. So looking at the results of this trial, we've got site 1 and site 2. So focusing on site 1 first, you can see that these lambs weighed on average 4 kilos at birth. And then at weaning on day 35, the lambs on site 1 weighed on average just under 17 kilos and achieved a daily live weight gain of 0.34 kilos per day. On site 2, we had 2 pens of lambs and they were split by their 2 service dates. So both lambs across both pens, all the lambs across both pens weighed on average 4 kilos at birth. And then lambs in pen 1 on site 2 weighed on average 18.5 kilos at weaning with a daily live weight gain of 0.38 kilos per day. And then in pen 2, the lambs achieved 15.5 kilos at weaning with a daily live weight gain of 0.33 kilos per day. So again, very good growth rates across both of these sites. Looking at site 1, the average intake of milk powder was around 14 kilos per lamb. And then tracking these lambs through to slaughter, these lambs were achieving on average 49 kilos at around just over 4 months of age. So moving on to our next trial, as I said, reducing the milk temperature being fed to these lambs is really important to encourage creep intake, to get them to be eating enough to have a well-developed rumen at weaning, so we don't see those setbacks in growth. So what we wanted to do with this trial is to really kind of develop this concept into making it more practical and simple on farm, especially when you've got different age lambs all entering a pen. So when you've got your older lambs in a pen that perhaps are close to weaning, you need them to be on lower temperature of milk. Whereas if you've got younger lambs still coming into the pen, do they need to be on warmer milk when they're sort of a little bit more vulnerable when they're younger? So what we wanted to do is look at whether we could actually feed milk to lambs at a constant temperature and whether we could actually feed it cold to lambs. So in this trial, all the lambs were being left on the ewe for the first 6 to 10 hours, and then they got a second feed of colostrum via bottle and teat. They were then all, the strongest, largest lamb was removed and they were put into a training pen. And in this training pen, they were being offered milk from an eco feeder at 25 degrees C. And they remained in the training pen for 7 days. After 7 days, the lambs got split into one of two groups. Half the lambs got put into a warm pen, and in this pen, the milk was being fed at 20 degrees C, and then it was reduced to 15 degrees C through to weaning. The other half of the lambs, following their 7 days in the training pen, they got put into a pen where milk was actually being fed to them cold. So it was being mixed with cold tap water, and so it measured around 10 degrees C. So after the first 7 days in the training pen, they were then offered cold milk through to weaning. What's really important if you are feeding cold milk is to make sure that the milk is actually mixed cold, because if you mix the milk warm and then let it go cold, lambs soon learn that actually if they drink the milk very quickly, it will be a little bit warmer before it goes cold. And then that can, that sort of gorging on the milk can lead to an increased risk of digestive upsets. So always mix the milk cold and feed it cold. The other factors to consider when feeding cold milk is just kind of bear in mind environmental temperature. So when we did this trial, it was in March, so we didn't have any snow on the ground and it wasn't particularly cold. Also, make sure that young lambs are out of the draft, have plenty of deep straw bedding, and use a heat lamp if required. So moving on to the results of this trial, in this table here, we've got the two groups of lambs, those in the warm pen and those in the cold pen. So you can see that the birth weight of these lambs was on average 3.5 kilos. And at weaning, the lambs in the warm pen achieved 12.5 kilos, and those in the cold pen achieved 13 kilos. So this equated to daily live weight gains of 0.25 and 0.27 kilos per day. So overall, there was very little difference in terms of the performance of these two groups of lambs, whether they'd had warm milk or cold milk. And in fact, the lambs in the cold pen were slightly heavier at weaning, and that's thought to be because they were actually observed to be more active in eating their creep feed. So keeping lambs on warm milk for the first 7 days and then actually putting the temperature back to 10 degrees C definitely had no negative impact on lamb performance. The final trial that I'm going to present to you was one that we did just this last year, and it was very much on building on that concept of being able to feed cold milk to offer a more practical on-farm solution when you have got those different aged lambs all coming into a pen. So for this trial, lambs were left on the ewe for the first 24 hours to suckle their colostrum. They were then all put into a training pen, which you can see in the sort of back of the photo on the slide. So in this training pen, they got 7 days in this smaller pen where milk was being fed at 25 degrees C from a U2. The U2 in the training pen had white teats, which are softer to aid training. And all the lambs in this training pen, there was a heat lamp there as well, just to keep them a little bit warmer. After 7 days, the lambs were then moved from the small training pen and put into the larger pen at the front of the photo. At this point, the milk was being mixed and fed cold, so it measured 10 degrees C. The U2 then had red teats, which are tougher and more robust. And at this point, the lambs all had access to water, creep feed, and straw. And then the lambs were being weaned abruptly at 35 days of age. So looking at the results for this trial, you can see that on average, the lamb weighed 3.5 kilos at birth, and at weaning on day 35, they were coming in at on average 15 kilos, which equated to a daily live weight gain of 0.33 kilos per day. So just to sort of sum up and top tips in terms of weaning and top sort of considerations. So at weaning, ideally we want these lambs to be a minimum of 35 days of age. We want them to weigh a minimum of 2.5 times their birth weight. So this should be around 9 to 10 kilos. And really importantly, they should be consuming at least 250 grams of creep feed per day. And that creep feed intake is really important to get them to have a well-developed rumen so that they can continue to grow and thrive around weaning with no setbacks. Abrupt weaning is best to reduce the risk of digestive upsets, but again, we need them to be eating enough creep feed to sort of compensate for when you remove the milk, they've got enough creep going in and their rumen is well developed so they can actually utilize the nutrients. And then finally, we obviously heard from Katie in terms of how important colostrum is. Other sort of top tips are to minimize the competition. So think about your group sizes, and ideally, we want a maximum of 25 lambs per pen. And then consider the number of teats. So really, it should be 6 to 8 lambs per teat with a maximum of 10 lambs per teat. Always mix your milk at a consistent concentration and at the correct concentration. And for Lamlac, this should be 200 grams of milk powder per litre of mixed milk. Train your lambs on warm milk, so offer it to them at 25 degrees C and hold them there for 7 days. And then it's really important that we knock that temperature back to 20 and then to 15 degrees C through to weaning to really encourage that creep intake. If feeding cold milk, mix it and feed it and at 10 degrees C, but obviously consider environmental temperature, and we need to focus on sort of, management becomes more critical in terms of making sure they're well bedded, deep straw, kept warm and dry, draft free, and give them a heat lamp if needed. As I've said, creep feed is absolutely essential for rumen development, so knocking those temperatures back will help encourage creep intake, and above all, attention to detail and good management is essential. So I hope I've shown you that with these trials, with good management, lambs can be reared successfully on milk replacer, helping to maximise the number of lambs reared. And of course, this also reduces the pressure on the ewe by leaving 2 lambs on the ewe, removing that third lamb, and this will help in turn improve flock longevity.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Stacey, business manager for the South for the Lamlac business. Within my role, I spend a lot of my time on farm advising on feeding systems of young stock, whether that's assessing the best milk replacer for the goals needed, advising on feed plans, as well as speaking at nutrition meetings to help farmers to do the best by their young stock. So before we jump to the video, I want to quickly cover what success or winning at weaning actually looks like on farm. Winning at weaning is about protecting lifetime performance. It's maintaining dry matter intake through the weaning transition, minimising any setbacks at weaning, and keeping lambs on a consistent growth curve so feed efficiency is not compromised. If lambs keep eating and keep growing through that transition, you are winning. There's also things to think about when it comes to abrupt weaning, that this can work really well. When lambs are properly prepared and already familiar with the feed, an abrupt weaning can actually reduce the stress and allow lambs to channel their energy into growth. I spent some time on St Cadoc Farm near Padstow to see how they run their lambing system. This is a great example of a farm who are feeding Lamlac and getting great results. The management on this farm focuses on a super clean environment with plenty of bedding and attention to detail, which is crucial. They have a flock of around 350 lambing in this block. They breed their own ewe replacements and have tweaked their system over the years to find the one which suits their management style and location on the North Cornwall coast. This is a great unit where they are putting theory and trial work to the test in a commercial system, dealing with real conditions, real lambs, and real decisions. Let's take a look at the video. We're here at St Cadoc Farm down on the North Cornwall coast. I'm joined by Morwenna. Morwenna, could you tell us a little bit about your farm down here and your location?
So we are, like you said, just outside Padstow on the North Cornwall coast, and we are currently lambing 350 sheep. Our main flock is Suffolk mules, which sort of about 5-6 years ago we were breeding our own ewe lamb, and then it just got to the stage where the crossovers between the rams and the ewes going in, it just got a bit too complicated. So we spent a few years trying to find what the perfect sort of sheep for us down here would be, and we found the Suffolk mules are happy to lamb early, and they give like a good sized lamb, which we like. So we started lambing 3 weeks ago, just before the new year started, and we're about halfway through our sheep numbers. And we've got till about end of February to lamb, so we've had a nice busy bit at the beginning, which is really nice, because obviously the sooner the lamb come out, the sooner we have the lamb, then the sooner we're out in the fields, and then sort of hopefully the early lambers will get us the best price at market when the market isn't too flooded.
Morwenna, could you tell us a little bit about your unit here and the system that you run with your husband?
Yeah, so we have all our sheep are lambed indoors. Obviously January is quite cold and the weather's, it can be kind, it can be dry, but it can be very cold, so we stay inside for our lambing. And then we were lucky this year, we only scanned 18 triplets. I mean, last year we scanned 40, so I was already crying before we started about the number of tame lamb I'm going to have. But this year the 18 triplets made me a little bit happier, knowing that probably our numbers of tame lamb would be less, obviously less work for me to do because I am the main tame lamb feeder. Our tame lamb normally comprise of triplet lamb, one of them off, because we only ever send doubles out into the field, so we always take one off a triplet. Older sheep sometimes won't be able to rear two lambs, so normally we'll take them off and sort of get them going. For the triplets, we always give them 100 ml of colostrum each, all three of them, or more if there's sort of quads or anything, and then just give them the best start to make sure they have got that sort of key nutrients, and then we'll leave them with the mother probably 24 to 48 hours, and then we take them off and then they become a tame lamb.
Brilliant. And once they go into the tame lamb pen, how do you feed them at that point?
We use a bottle feeding system, so it's a case of getting them used to the bottle, which can take some time. And then once they're used to the bottle, we then put them on a rack. So I have pens of 4 lambs and I rack feed them. And then sort of working up, I mean, they're only little, so I work up 4 times a day we feed them at the moment when they're first born, and getting up to a litre a day for them to be having. So then we introduce creep feed at about 2 weeks, and then once they're comfortable on creep feed and sort of had their time 5 weeks on the bottle, then we will abrupt wean them.
So feeding by bottle, as Morwenna is doing here, is a great way to be able to monitor and measure intakes into those lambs. What we are looking to achieve is for those tame lambs to have achieved 2.5 times body weight when it comes to weaning at around 5 weeks of age. We want to then abruptly wean to ensure that we get adequate creep intake into those animals to get them off to the best possible start.
So it's really important to keep all of your feeding equipment squeaky clean. Morwenna here is using hot water and disinfectant to clean them out, ready for the next use. Cleanliness within the lambing shed is crucial to success for those young lambs as they go on to thrive in later life. What we really need to ensure is that we've got a lovely clean dry bed for them to lie on. We also want to make sure that environmental factors such as drafts are kept to a minimum and that they can keep warm within the space that they're lying in. When it comes to weaning, there's a few key principles that we need to take into consideration. We need to ensure that those lambs that we are weaning off are at a minimum of 35 days of age and 5 weeks of age. They need to be at least 2.5 times birth weight and starting to eat creep feed at that point. What we want to do is we want to abruptly wean to ensure a smooth transition from milk onto their dry food to continue that successful daily life weight gain.